I think the term Asian NATO is one that many countries are very uncomfortable with because it implies a posture towards China, which is not one that they want to see. So that's especially for the countries of Southeast Asia. And so for that reason, Australia, the US, Japan until this point have been very careful to avoid this language of Asian NATO. And instead what the US has talked about is the idea of a lattice work of cooperation and using much less confrontational language. So I think the previous policies of the new Japanese Prime Minister that really embrace the term Asian NATO are a little bit awkward for the US, for Australia, and perhaps for Japan now as well. And so many countries have just been trying to talk this down a little bit and make it clear that this is an idea that the new Japanese Prime Minister has had for some time, but nothing is really changing now.
So everyone's walking away from it, really, walking back away from it. Let's talk about China lifting this ban on Australian lobsters export. I mean, it's great news for the lobster industry here in Australia. It also shows this thawing of relations between Beijing and Canberra, of course. But at the same time, Australia still needs to walk that fine line between taking a stand against China's military aggression and still trying to attract trade ties as well. How long do you think Canberra would have to walk this line?
I think it's a difficult line to walk, and events that will continue to unfold will make it more difficult. So we saw this earlier in the year when the Chinese Premier visited Australia at the same time that China was doing some really concerning things towards the Philippines in the South China Sea. And I think to this point the government has been able to manage it reasonably well, so making clear that certain forms of China's behaviour are unacceptable, raising those concerns with China, and at the same time wanting to have diplomatic dialogue. And that is reasonable in many ways because most countries in our region do have that sort of two-track relationship with China, where on the one hand they do have a normal diplomatic relationship and they're able to raise concerns.
Prime Minister, of course, is trying to drum up more Asian investment here in Australia, and that's part of his visit to ASEAN as well. But you know, there are recent moves too that Canberra has made to try to restrict student visas coming into Australia. Is that sending mixed messages?
I think the efforts to try and encourage Australian investment into the region is really quite challenging because it's hard to, we can't direct private companies about where they should invest. So it's a really tough agenda. So to me it is kind of contradictory that we're not doing all we can to facilitate the movement of people through education to Australia, as well as perhaps looking to inward investment in Australia as a way that we can actually increase those two-way economic ties, because those are things that are under the government's jurisdiction.
Yeah, I can't let you go without asking, of course, about Myanmar. We know that the ASEAN nations are very hesitant when it comes to interfering or even commenting on any domestic issues in other countries, of course. But how is ASEAN dealing with the junta? You know, 3 years on from Aung San Suu Kyi's being deposed?
Well, these summits were actually the first time that Myanmar chose to send an official representative to the ASEAN Summit since the coup. So they've had this option for some time that they've been able to send a non-political representative, so a senior official, and they haven't chosen to exercise that. So in effect, Myanmar has been empty-chaired for the last couple of years. This year they did send an official. I think what that shows is that they're really looking to find a pathway back to some sort of form of international legitimacy, but it's not going to happen until something changes, and the civil war in Myanmar continues to rage, and ASEAN has been really ineffective at encouraging the junta to take any kind of notice of what it says.